Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about what it's really like for this American living here in England. Anytime you decide to move, it's a big decision, right? And when you're deciding to move really far away from home, i.e. another country, it's definitely something that shouldn't be taken lightly. It can be exhilarating, it could be nerve-wracking, but overall, mostly it's exhausting. My personal unique situation, I was exposed to British culture for a while, well before I even made the decision to jump across the pond and live here in England. I had been around English people for a long time. I was exposed to a lot of British sitcoms and television shows, news programs, and I even had the opportunity to visit England on several occasions. That had its advantages and its disadvantages. The advantage was, that I had all that legwork already kind of done, or a lot of the legwork, and I was able to have a better understanding of what I was getting into. But that also gave me a little bit of arrogance in assuming that I knew everything that I was getting into, and that in the end proved to be something that I had to come to terms with once I was living here for a little while. Ultimately, our specific decision for our situation came down to what was safer, what was more economical, which country had a better prospect for our futures. Unfortunately, in America, we just didn't see a comfortable and viable future for ourselves and our child. And we realized that in our unique circumstances that we were better off taking the plunge and moving to a different country and trying things out here in England and seeing how it goes. No matter where you're moving, no matter what your reasons are for moving, it's still a difficult decision. It's not something that you make overnight, right? It is something that you will have to just think very long and very hard about and try to think through all the scenarios and possibilities as much as possible ahead of time. Then once you make the decision, you have to have that conversation with other people in your life that you've made this decision that's life-changing, not just for you, but for those of you who are involved in, aspects of your everyday life. Some of those conversations aren't so bad. For example, the conversation I had with my boss once I was ready to give my notice and all of that wasn't so bad. They were disappointed, but excited because it was a big move and it was a big opportunity for us. Having conversations with neighbors and family and friends are definitely much harder. Some of them obviously harder than others. Some were filled with a ton of tears and a bunch of sadness. And it didn't just happen with the initial conversation. It was an ongoing conversation up until the day we left, basically. And it's something that you think about, but you aren't really prepared for until it's happening. So for me, even though I had thought long and hard and sort of rehearsed what I was going to say and how I was going to present our case and all of that, it still was something that was filled with a lot of tears and sadness, particularly when I was telling my family. It allowed me to really focus on all of the next steps and tasks that were at hand, which there were plenty. So once we made our decision that we were actually going to move, it took over a year to really get into England and on British soil. There's so much stuff to think about. We had to think about selling our house. Like I said, we had to talk to our jobs and the school system. Equivalently, we had to think about where are we going to live when we get here? Is it going to be very difficult for us to get jobs when we get here? How are we going to get the child set up for all the interviews that we need? Because you have to apply for schools here. All of those things take a lot of research, they take a lot of conversations, and they take a lot of time and a lot of planning. There's a lot of little things that come up in the process that you don't really think of ahead of time. And I definitely didn't prepare myself enough for the amount of work it actually takes to plan such a big move. And that's aside from the working on the visa, applying for a visa, seeing what I'm eligible for, and having to gather all of the documentation to prove my identity. We had to get birth certificates. We had to get deeds to our house. We had to provide copies of our passports. We had to get pictures and mementos of our life together to prove that it was valid and we're legit. It's very time consuming and it's a lot of paperwork. A little unsettling as well, because you basically are submitting proof of your entire life to a group of complete strangers that don't know you, don't know your situation, don't know anything about your life, and they get to make the decision whether or not you get to do it. So even though you've made a decision, you've invested all this money, invested all this time and sweat equity, you still may end up not being able to go. That is a difficult topic. It's a difficult thing to get your mind around and understand fully. And I definitely wasn't prepared for the anxiety that comes along with that whole process and the waiting for the decision and everything. It was a chapter I was very happy to close. Once we got here to England, we had basically the same processes to go through. We had to provide proof of identity, proof of my, approval of residency, proof of the rest of the family's citizenship, when applying for jobs, when setting up bank accounts, when trying to figure out a place to live, when getting the child registered for school, when buying a car, and everything, down to even like getting a cell phone. It was so much stress. And it continues to be an ongoing ball of stress and an ongoing to-do list. Also, I have to deal with the fact that I have to keep my American documents current. My driver's license expired and I have to be able to figure out how I can renew that abroad, which is not easy. Worry about passports being valid. I have to make sure that I'm keeping copies of all of my important papers, where it's paying council tax and signing, leases for our apartments or whatever, in order to make sure that in the visa renewal process, I'm also valid and I am still who I am and I am actually legit in my whole renewal process. It really does feel like I'm constantly proving who I am. I'm constantly trying to validate my existence and that I actually want to stay here and I want to live here. Ultimately, it's just a harsh reality of being an American living here in the UK. There's always going to be some legal process that I'm going to be involved in. There's always going to be something I have to prove, and there's always going to be some decision I'm going to be waiting for. So I just have to accept that. And I just have to prepare as best as I can and then brace myself for impact on whatever decision is made on my behalf by complete strangers. The good news is you get to start with a clean slate. But the bad news is you're starting with a clean slate. Let me explain. You literally have to learn things all over again. You have to learn how to drive all over again. You have zero credit history. So I couldn't even get a cell phone plan for a long time. I had to buy the phone outright, and then I had to have a pay-as-you-go plan for like 3 to 4 months before they would even consider me to actually have like buy a phone and have an ongoing monthly plan. We needed a guarantor just to get into our apartment, even though we had a big sum of money from our house to secure us financially. And to this day, I still can't even get a credit card in my name because I'm not a permanent resident. So no one wants to extend any kind of credit toward me. And we had to also figure out the cost of living between the two countries because it is different. And, certain things are more expensive here in England than they are in America. And certain things aren't. But you're also, the salaries aren't exactly the same. And the things that you're paying, the taxes that you're paying and stuff aren't exactly leveled at the same. And insurances and things like that, they're all different. You have to learn all of them. You have to figure it all out and then figure out the budget that you're going to be able to live on. And not really knowing a lot of that stuff ahead of time can be a bit daunting and a bit overwhelming. You just have to realize that you literally are starting from scratch and that you basically have to prove yourself and start all over. No matter what visa you're on or how you've come into the country or how long you've been here, you will always be classed by some people as an immigrant. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not something that I personally see as a negative at all. But the unfortunate truth is some will. And that does come with a certain dichotomy that you're going to have to learn how to navigate. The reality is that some people just don't want foreigners in their country, no matter what the situation is or what the circumstances are. And even if they're not specifically talking about me or my situation, it can feel that way, and it can make it difficult to participate in the conversation or certain circles. I don't think it's something that they're doing intentionally. I just don't think they realize that, you know, what they're saying does have an impact on me and my status and my everyday life as well. But even if it's just rhetoric from like an online group or a news story or a television show, it still is uneasy, and it still kind of, I do take it personally, whether I should or shouldn't. And there are many times when I've felt unwanted. Not because I'm not contributing to society, not because I don't want to be here, not because I'm not being respectful or trying to participate and understand the culture, just because I'm foreign. Some people do not want to budge. Some people do not want to admit that they might be wrong about something or they might be misunderstanding something, even when you do your best to try to prove it to them. Ultimately, all of these things come down to the individual person that you're speaking with or interacting with, and the amount of interaction you have with them, right? If it's just someone that you're randomly overhearing on the train, or someone that is you're buying something from, you can kind of blow it off and not really pay much attention to it and just take what you can out of it for the next time. But if it's someone that you have a personal relationship with or someone that you work with, you have to just navigate it as best as you can through those moments, right? And I have had to learn that I have to be a little bit more patient with people that may not have been exposed to immigrants, Americans, foreigners, or anything like that. But I also have to allow myself to be emotional and to acknowledge that it affects me and that I'm allowed to speak about that as well. And that that's also a valid point of the conversation. I hate this, but I have to be honest. I have actually lost touch with more people from America than people that I've gained in my circle living here in England. As life goes on, you're going to lose touch with people. Relationships are going to change. You're going to evolve just like anything else in life. And I understand that, and I accept that. But I have to confess that there are certain relationships that I thought were much more solid than they are. And I never expected to lose so many people in such a short amount of time. Sometimes life just takes over and you forget that it's been that long since you've last spoken to somebody. And I know I'm just as much of a culprit as anybody else. I also have to acknowledge and accept that if it's not a priority for me to consistently reach out to them, or vice versa for them to make the initiative to either reply to me or to initiate contact with me, then maybe that relationship wasn't as much as a priority or an important relationship in my life as I thought. The last couple of years have been some of the toughest of my life. Overall, when you factor in the decision-making process, the process of getting set up and leaving America, the process of getting established here in England, now I'm in the process of renewing my status, and hopefully I get to stay for a while longer. It's a very long, involved, exhausting, overwhelming process. And it feels like I've been on a roller coaster for the past 4 or 5 years. And although the last few years in particular in adjusting to this new life has been tough for me, I'm trying to remember that ultimately life is all about the journey, right? No matter what I excel at, what I win at, or what I lose at, or what I completely fail miserably at, there's value in the process and there's value in everything that I'm doing. And I need to just remember that the positives will eventually outweigh the negatives, and the hard work and effort and time and money and stress that I have been through will ultimately work out to something positive in the end. If it doesn't, for some reason, I do have the ability to go back to the United States. Even if that does happen, it'll never be exactly what it was. I'm not the same person that I was when I lived there, and I have to remember that I never will be. And no matter what happens from here on out, who I am and who I become is ultimately up to me. What I take from this and what I learn and how I apply it in my future is ultimately up to me. I also have to realize that it doesn't all have to be figured out at once, that it can be something that I learn over time, and that I do have that time ahead of me. And most of all, I'm just reminding myself to be honest with myself, honest with my emotions and where I am, honest with what I really want out of this journey and what I want out of the future for myself and my family and my loved ones. That I am doing the best that I can, and that I will continue to do the best that I can, and that, you know, if some things like relationships have fallen off, or a job hasn't worked out, or even ultimately if this doesn't work out, that it wasn't a failure, because I still learned something and I still got a lot of value out of it in the entire process. And in the end of the day, that's really all that we can hope for. I am excited for the future. I think it will be extremely positive. I'm very, very excited to have had this opportunity. I can't ever express how grateful I am. And that's what it's really like for this American living in England so far. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.